The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged mountains of Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera adjusted his radio equipment one final time. The SEAL team had been moving through the hostile territory for 3 days now, tracking a high-value target that intelligence suggested was hiding in a remote village nestled deep in the valley below. Rivera wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at his team. 6 of the most elite soldiers America had to offer, each one handpicked for this mission. Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson led the unit with the quiet confidence that came from years of successful operations. Petty Officer First Class David Chen handled communications, his fingers dancing across the radio controls with practiced ease. Hospital Corpsman Second Class Maria Santos carried the medical supplies that could mean the difference between life and death in these mountains. Petty Officer Second Class Alex Rodriguez served as their demolitions expert, his backpack carefully loaded with explosive devices. Petty Officer Third Class Ryan Mitchell was their youngest member, but had already proven himself in 2 previous deployments. And then there was Rivera himself, the sniper whose steady hand had saved countless lives in operations across 3 different countries. The team had been inserted by helicopter 48 hours earlier, dropped into a landing zone 15 miles from their target. Intelligence reports indicated that a Taliban commander responsible for multiple attacks on American forces was hiding in the village of Khost Matun. The man had evaded capture for months, always staying one step ahead of coalition forces. This time, however, they had solid intelligence from a local informant who had grown tired of the violence plaguing his region. As they moved through the rocky terrain, Rivera couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The mountains were too quiet. In his experience, silence in Afghanistan usually meant trouble. The local wildlife should have been more active at this time of morning. Birds should have been calling to each other across the valleys. Instead, there was an unnatural stillness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Thompson raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. They had reached a ridge that offered a clear view of the target village below. Through his binoculars, Rivera could see the small cluster of mud brick buildings that made up Khost Matun. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, indicating that people were awake and going about their morning routines. Everything looked normal from their vantage point. Chen set up his radio equipment and made contact with their forward operating base. The voice of Colonel Sarah Williams crackled through the static, confirming that satellite imagery showed no unusual activity in the area. The mission was green-lighted to proceed to the next phase. The plan was straightforward. Thompson would lead Santos, Rodriguez, and Mitchell down into the village to conduct the actual capture operation. Rivera would remain on the ridge with Chen, providing overwatch and communication support. If everything went according to plan, they would have their target in custody within 2 hours and be on their way to the extraction point. Rivera found a suitable position among the rocks and set up his rifle. The Barrett M82 was a beast of a weapon, capable of accurate shots at distances exceeding a mile. Through his scope, he could clearly see the building that intelligence had identified as the target's location. It was a 2-story structure on the eastern edge of the village, distinguished by a green door and a small satellite dish on the roof. As Thompson's team began their descent toward the village, Rivera methodically scanned the surrounding area through his scope. Years of training had taught him to look for anything that seemed out of place, a reflection that shouldn't be there. Movement in a window, a shadow that didn't match the morning sun's angle. Chen monitored multiple radio frequencies, staying in contact with both the ground team and their base. Everything seemed to be proceeding normally. Thompson's voice came through the radio calm and professional as he updated their position every few minutes. The team reached the outskirts of the village without incident. Rivera watched through his scope as they moved between buildings with the fluid precision that came from countless hours of training together. They were within 100 meters of the target building when Rivera noticed something that made his blood run cold. In a window of a building that should have been empty, sunlight glinted off what could only be the lens of a rifle scope. Someone was watching Thompson's team through crosshairs, and they had no idea they were walking into a trap. Rivera immediately keyed his radio. Overwatch to ground team. You have a possible sniper in the 2-story building, northeast corner, 2nd floor window. Adjust your approach. Thompson's voice came back steady despite the danger. Copy that, Overwatch. We see the building. Can you get a clear shot? Rivera adjusted his position slightly and peered through his scope. The angle was difficult, and civilian buildings surrounded the target area. One wrong shot could hit an innocent person. Worse, there might be more than one enemy sniper. If he revealed his position by taking a shot, he could compromise the entire mission. Negative on clear shot, Rivera responded. Too many civilians in the area. You need to find alternative route. But as Thompson's team began to adjust their approach, Rivera saw something that made his heart race. 3 more rifle barrels appeared in windows throughout the village. This wasn't just one sniper lying in wait. This was a coordinated ambush, and his team was walking directly into it. The silence he had noticed earlier suddenly made perfect sense. The villagers knew what was coming. They had either been warned or forced to stay inside while enemy fighters took positions throughout their homes. His team was outnumbered and outgunned, with civilians caught in the middle. Rivera's mind raced through their options. They could abort the mission and withdraw, but that would mean losing their best chance to capture a target who had killed dozens of American soldiers. They could call for air support, but that would take time they didn't have and could result in civilian casualties. Or they could proceed with the mission, knowing they were walking into a trap but hoping their training and experience would see them through. Through his scope, Rivera watched as more enemy fighters appeared in positions throughout the village. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a carefully planned operation designed to eliminate an entire SEAL team. Someone had betrayed them, and now 6 of America's finest soldiers were about to pay the price for that betrayal. Rivera's finger hovered over his radio as he counted at least 8 enemy positions scattered throughout the village. Each one was perfectly placed to create overlapping fields of fire that would turn the narrow streets into a killing zone. His team was walking into what could only be described as a perfectly executed trap. "Ground team, this is Overwatch," Rivera whispered into his radio, his voice tight with urgency. "Count at least 8 enemy positions. This is a full ambush. Recommend immediate withdrawal." Thompson's response came back calm but determined. "Negative, Overwatch. We're too close to abort now. Target is confirmed in the building. We proceed with modified plan." Rivera understood Thompson's reasoning. They had spent weeks planning this operation. The target was responsible for the deaths of 17 American soldiers and countless Afghan civilians. If they walked away now, he would disappear again, probably for months. But Rivera also knew that proceeding meant almost certain casualties among his team. Chen, monitoring multiple radio frequencies from his position next to Rivera, suddenly grabbed his arm. "Marcus, we've got a problem. I'm picking up enemy radio chatter. They know exactly where we are. They're talking about the Americans on the ridge and planning to flank our position." Rivera felt his stomach drop. Not only was his ground team walking into an ambush, but his own position was compromised. Someone had provided the enemy with detailed intelligence about their entire operation. This level of betrayal could only come from someone with high-level access to their mission planning. Through his scope, Rivera watched as Thompson's team reached the target building. They moved with practiced efficiency, Rodriguez setting charges on the green door while Santos and Mitchell covered the approaches. Everything looked normal from Rivera's distant perspective, but he knew that the moment they breached that door, all hell would break loose. The explosion from Rodriguez's charges echoed across the valley like thunder. Almost immediately, the village erupted in gunfire. Muzzle flashes appeared in windows throughout the settlement as enemy fighters opened fire on the SEAL team. Rivera watched in horror as his friends disappeared behind clouds of dust and smoke, their situation becoming more desperate by the second. "Overwatch. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions." Thompson's voice came through the radio, nearly drowned out by the sound of automatic weapons. "Request immediate support." Rivera didn't hesitate. Despite the risk to civilians, he began engaging the enemy snipers one by one. His first shot shattered the window where he had initially spotted the enemy observer. Through his scope, he saw the figure fall backward, but there was no time to confirm the kill. Another sniper had appeared in a different building, already taking aim at Thompson's position. Rivera's second shot rang out across the valley, and another enemy fighter dropped from sight. But for every sniper he eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear. The enemy had prepared for this operation far better than anyone had anticipated. Chen worked frantically with his radio equipment, trying to call in air support while simultaneously coordinating with Thompson's team. Apache gunships are 15 minutes out, he reported to Rivera between bursts of enemy fire that were getting closer to their position. Fast movers are 25 minutes out. 25 minutes might as well have been 25 hours. Thompson's team would be overrun long before air support arrived. Rivera could hear the desperation in Thompson's voice as he called out enemy positions and coordinated his team's defense. They were pinned down in a building that was slowly being surrounded by enemy fighters who seemed to know their exact location at all times. Santos is hit. Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. She's bleeding bad. We need to get out of here now. Rivera's heart sank. Santos was not just their medic. She was like a sister to the entire team. The thought of losing her to this betrayal filled him with a rage that he had to fight to control. Anger would only make his shooting less accurate, and right now, accuracy was the only thing keeping his team alive. Through his scope, Rivera could see enemy fighters moving between buildings, getting closer to the structure where his team was trapped. He took shot after shot, each one finding its mark, but there were simply too many targets. For every enemy he eliminated, 2 more appeared from different positions. Chen suddenly grabbed Rivera's shoulder. We've got movement on our 6. They're coming up the ridge behind us. Rivera spun around to see 3 figures in traditional Afghan clothing, climbing the rocky slope toward their position. Each one carried an AK-47, and they were moving with the practiced stealth of experienced fighters. The enemy had indeed flanked their position, just as Chen had overheard on their radio intercepts. Take the radio and move to secondary position, Rivera ordered Chen. I'll hold them off here. Chen hesitated for a moment, clearly reluctant to leave Rivera alone, but military discipline took over. He gathered his equipment and began moving to a position 50 meters away that would give him better radio reception while keeping him out of the immediate line of fire. Rivera turned his rifle toward the approaching enemies. At this range, the Barrett was almost overkill, but it was the weapon he had and he was going to use it effectively. His first shot caught the lead climber center mass, sending him tumbling backward down the rocky slope. The other 2 immediately took cover behind large boulders, but Rivera had marked their positions. Meanwhile, the radio crackled with increasingly desperate updates from Thompson's team. Rodriguez had been wounded while trying to move to a better defensive position. Mitchell was running low on ammunition, and Santos, despite her injury, was still trying to treat Rodriguez's wounds while enemy bullets shattered the walls around them. Rivera found himself in an impossible situation. His team in the village needed his support to survive, but he also had enemies closing in on his own position. He couldn't effectively support both situations simultaneously, and every second of delay meant his friends were getting closer to being overrun. Through his scope, he could see that enemy fighters had completely surrounded the building where Thompson's team was trapped. They were moving closer, preparing for a final assault that would overwhelm the wounded and outnumbered SEALs. Time was running out, and Rivera knew that conventional tactics weren't going to save his team. That's when he noticed something that gave him a desperate idea. On a ridge across the valley, nearly a mile away, sunlight reflected off something metallic. It was probably just a piece of debris or abandoned equipment, but Rivera's trained eye recognized the possibility of what it might be. If he was right, it could change everything. If he was wrong, his team would die while he chased shadows. Rivera stared through his scope at the distant reflection, his mind racing through possibilities. The metallic glint was coming from a ridge position that offered perfect overwatch of the entire village. If someone was up there with a rifle, they would have clear shots at every enemy position that was currently pinning down his team. But the distance was extreme, even for a skilled marksman, and Rivera had no way of knowing if the person was friend or foe. The sound of approaching footsteps reminded him that he had more immediate concerns. The 2 remaining enemy fighters were working their way up the ridge, using the rocky terrain for cover as they closed in on his position. Rivera could hear them calling to each other in Pashto, coordinating their approach with the confidence of men who believed they had trapped their prey. Chen's voice crackled through the radio from his new position. Marcus, I've got eyes on our flankers. They're about 30 meters out and closing fast. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now. Rivera made a split-second decision that went against everything in his tactical training. Instead of focusing on the immediate threat, he turned his rifle back toward the village and began transmitting on an emergency frequency that he knew was monitored by various coalition forces throughout the region. Any station, this is Viper 6. American forces in contact, grid coordinates 34.2858 north, 944 east. Request immediate assistance from any coalition sniper in the area. We have wounded and are about to be overrun. Break. Unknown station on Ridge 77. If you are coalition forces, we need help now. The radio remained silent except for static. Rivera's gamble that someone friendly was positioned on the distant ridge seemed to be failing. The metallic reflection could have been anything, from a piece of abandoned equipment to a solar panel on a building he couldn't see clearly. Behind him, Chen opened fire with his M4 carbine as the enemy fighters got close enough to his position to engage. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the ridge, mixing with the ongoing battle sounds from the village below. Rivera found himself caught between two firefights, unable to effectively support either his teammate or his trapped squad. Through his scope, Rivera could see that the situation in the village was deteriorating rapidly. Enemy fighters had reached the building where Thompson's team was holed up, and were preparing to breach the walls with explosives. Santos was still conscious but losing blood, making it impossible for her to effectively return fire. Rodriguez was trying to cover two different approaches, simultaneously while Thompson worked to establish a better defensive position. Rivera took another shot at an enemy fighter who was getting too close to the building, but missed as the man ducked behind cover at the last second. The extreme stress of the situation was affecting his normally steady aim. He forced himself to take a deep breath and refocus, just as his instructors had taught him years ago during sniper school. That's when he heard it. A single rifle shot from an extreme distance, followed immediately by one of the enemy fighters near Thompson's position, dropping to the ground. The shot had come from the direction of the distant ridge, and the sound arrived nearly 2 seconds after the bullet impact, indicating a distance of well over 1,000 meters. Rivera grabbed his radio. Unknown shooter on Ridge 77, this is Viper 6. Confirm you are coalition forces. We have friendly forces marked with IR strobes in the target building. A voice came back through the static, speaking with a slight accent that Rivera couldn't immediately place. Viper 6, this is Ghost, confirmed coalition. I have eyes on your position in the village. Sending support now. Relief flooded through Rivera as he realized that his desperate gamble had paid off. Somewhere on that distant ridge was a sniper with the skill to make shots at extreme range, and more importantly, the willingness to help a trapped SEAL team. But Rivera didn't have time to wonder about the identity of this mysterious ally. Chen was still engaged with the flanking force, and Thompson's team needed immediate support. Another distant rifle shot rang out, and a second enemy fighter near the village building fell. Whoever this Ghost was, he was an exceptional marksman. Rivera had never seen such accurate shooting at that range, especially under combat conditions with moving targets and environmental factors to consider. Ghost, this is Viper 6, Rivera transmitted. We have wounded friendlies in the target building, and enemy forces preparing to breach. Can you provide suppressing fire while we coordinate extraction? Copy that, Viper 6. I count 12 enemy positions around your team. Beginning systematic elimination now. Keep your heads down. What followed was a display of marksmanship that Rivera would remember for the rest of his life. The distant sniper began methodically eliminating enemy fighters with single, precise shots. Each bullet found its target despite the extreme range and challenging conditions. Enemy fighters who had been confident in their superior number suddenly found themselves being picked off one by an invisible opponent they couldn't locate or engage. Rivera used the breathing space provided by Ghost's intervention to refocus on his own situation. He could hear Chen still engaged with the flanking force, and knew he needed to eliminate that threat before he could fully concentrate on supporting the extraction of Thompson's team. Turning his rifle toward the sound of Chen's firefight, Rivera spotted one of the enemy fighters trying to work his way around to Chen's blind spot. Rivera's shot caught the man in the center of his chest, dropping him instantly. The remaining fighter, realizing he was now outnumbered and outgunned, began retreating down the ridge. Chen, threat neutralized on your position, Rivera called out. Get back on the radio and coordinate our extraction. We've got help from a coalition sniper, and I think we might actually get out of this. As if summoned by Rivera's words, the distant sound of helicopter rotors began to echo across the valley. The Apache gunships that Chen had called for earlier were finally arriving on station, Between Ghost's precision shooting and the incoming air support, the tactical situation was shifting rapidly in favor of the SEAL team. Rivera watched through his scope as Ghost continued his methodical elimination of enemy positions. The mysterious sniper's shooting was so accurate that enemy fighters were beginning to abandon their positions and flee the village entirely. Some tried to take cover in buildings that offered protection from the ridge position, only to find themselves exposed to Rivera's field of fire from his own vantage point. Thompson's voice came through the radio, sounding stronger and more confident than it had in the past 20 minutes. Overwatch, this is ground team. Enemy forces are withdrawing. Santos is stabilized and Rodriguez is mobile. We're preparing to move to extraction point Alpha. Rivera felt a wave of relief wash over him. His team was going to survive this ambush. But as he prepared to provide overwatch for their movement to the extraction point, he realized that he still knew nothing about the mysterious sniper who had turned the tide of the battle. Who was Ghost and how had he happened to be in position to save a trapped SEAL team? As the Apache gunships arrived overhead, their distinctive rotor noise filling the valley, Rivera maintained overwatch while Thompson's team began their tactical withdrawal from the village. The enemy fighters who hadn't been eliminated by Ghost's precision shooting were now in full retreat, unwilling to face the combined firepower of attack helicopters and 2 expert snipers. Rivera kept his scope trained on the extraction route, scanning for any remaining threats while his team moved through the village streets. Santos was walking under her own power, though Rodriguez had to help support her when they crossed open areas. Her medical training had allowed her to treat her own wounds well enough to remain mobile, but Rivera could see through his scope that she was still losing blood. Ghost, this is Viper 6, Rivera transmitted to the mysterious sniper. My team is moving to extraction point Alpha. Can you maintain overwatch until they're clear of the village? Copy, Viper 6. I have clear sight lines to your extraction route. We'll maintain overwatch until your birds are wheels up. The voice that came back was calm and professional, but Rivera noticed something in the accent that he hadn't caught before. There was something European about it, possibly British or Australian. Whoever Ghost was, he wasn't American military. That raised new questions about how a foreign sniper happened to be positioned perfectly to save an American SEAL team. Chen had re-established communication with their forward operating base and was coordinating the arrival of extraction helicopters. 2 Blackhawks were inbound, escorted by the Apache gunships that were now circling the village to ensure no enemy forces remained in the area. Rivera watched his team reach the extraction point, a small clearing about half a mile from the village where the helicopters could safely land. The landing zone was surrounded by low hills that provided natural protection, but Rivera knew that enemy forces could still be hiding in the rocky terrain. He kept his rifle ready, scanning constantly for any sign of movement. That's when he noticed something that made him pause. Through his scope, he could see a figure moving along the distant ridge where Ghost was positioned. The person was packing equipment with the efficient movements of a professional soldier preparing to leave a firing position. Rivera adjusted his scope's magnification to its maximum setting, trying to get a better look at their mysterious ally. What he saw surprised him. The figure was smaller than he had expected, moving with a fluid grace that suggested extensive training. Most surprising of all, as the person turned briefly in Rivera's direction, he caught a glimpse of long hair tied back in a practical ponytail. Ghost might be a woman. The Blackhawks thundered into the valley, their pilots expertly navigating the mountainous terrain to reach the extraction point. Rivera watched his team board the first helicopter, while keeping his scope trained on the surrounding area. The Apache gunships maintained their protective circle, their weapon systems tracking any potential threats. Viper 6, this is Ghost, came the voice over the radio. Your team is clear and wheels up. I'm breaking down my position now. It was an honor to work with you. Rivera wanted to ask a dozen questions about Ghost's identity and how she had come to be in position to help them, but he knew that operational security meant such information couldn't be shared over unsecured radio channels. Instead, he simply replied, Ghost, this is Viper 6, thank you for saving my team. I owe you one. No debt owed, Viper 6. We're all on the same side out here. As Rivera prepared to move to his own extraction point where Chen was waiting, he took one last look through his scope at the distant ridge. Ghost was gone, disappeared into the rocky terrain as efficiently as she had appeared. Rivera wondered if he would ever learn the identity of the sniper who had turned a potential disaster into a successful mission. Chen had already packed most of their equipment when Rivera reached the secondary extraction point. A third Black Hawk was approaching to pick them up, having waited to ensure that the primary team was safely away before exposing another aircraft to potential ground fire. "Did you see who that was?" Chen asked as they loaded their gear into the helicopter. "That shooting was incredible." "I've never seen anything like it." Rivera shook his head. "Negative. Whoever it was disappeared before I could get a good look. All I know is that Ghost saved our lives today." As their helicopter lifted off and began the flight back to base, Rivera found himself staring out the window at the ridge where Ghost had been positioned. The distance was even more impressive from this aerial perspective. Making accurate shots at that range required not just exceptional skill, but also intimate knowledge of ballistics, wind conditions, and environmental factors. The flight back to the forward operating base gave Rivera time to think about what had happened. The ambush had been too well coordinated to be a coincidence. Someone with access to their mission planning had provided detailed intelligence to enemy forces. The betrayal had nearly cost 6 American lives, and only the intervention of a mysterious Allied sniper had prevented a catastrophe. Colonel Williams was waiting on the landing pad when their helicopter touched down. Rivera could see the relief on her face as she watched the team disembark. Santos was immediately taken to the base medical facility for proper treatment of her wounds, while Rodriguez was also checked by medics to ensure his injuries weren't serious. "Debrief in 1 hour," Williams told Rivera as he walked past her toward the barracks. "I want to know everything about this Ghost character and how they happened to be in position to help you." Rivera nodded, but he was already dreading the conversation. How could he explain that their lives had been saved by someone whose identity he didn't know, and whose presence in the area couldn't be explained through normal channels? Military intelligence would want answers that he simply didn't have. As he cleaned his rifle and prepared for the debriefing, Rivera couldn't shake the feeling that Ghost's appearance hadn't been a coincidence. The positioning had been too perfect, the timing too precise. Someone had known about their mission and had made preparations to provide backup support without going through official channels. The more Rivera thought about it, the more questions arose. How had Ghost known to monitor their emergency frequency? How had she known the exact location of their operation? And most importantly, who was she working for? The professional competence and advanced equipment suggested military training, but no coalition forces were supposed to be operating in that area. Rivera finished cleaning his weapons and headed toward the debriefing room, knowing that he was about to have a very difficult conversation with his commanding officer. The mission had been a success, with their target captured and no American casualties, but the circumstances surrounding their rescue would raise questions that could take weeks to answer. As he walked across the base, Rivera looked up at the mountains surrounding their position. Somewhere out there, Ghost was probably moving to her next position, ready to provide support for other operations that might go wrong. Rivera hoped that someday he would have the chance to meet the sniper who had saved his team and properly thank her for her service. The debriefing room felt unusually tense as Rivera sat across from Colonel Williams and Major Robert Hayes, the base intelligence officer. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on their faces as Williams reviewed the mission report that Rivera had just submitted. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Williams finally looked up. "So let me understand this correctly, Sergeant Rivera," Williams began, her voice carefully controlled. "Your team was ambushed by a force that knew your exact route, timing, and mission objectives. Then a mystery sniper, who just happened to be positioned perfectly on a ridge a mile away, eliminated multiple enemy targets with impossible accuracy and disappeared without identifying themselves properly." Rivera shifted in his chair. "That's correct, ma'am. The sniper identified as Ghost and claimed to be coalition forces. Without their intervention, we would have lost the entire team." Major Hayes leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Rivera, do you realize how this sounds? We have no coalition snipers operating in that area. British SAS finished their rotation last month. Australian forces are operating 60 miles south, and the shot angles you're describing are beyond the capability of most military snipers." "I know how it sounds, sir," Rivera replied, "but I witnessed it firsthand. 12 confirmed kills at distances exceeding 1,500 meters. Professional technique and equipment, Whoever Ghost is, they're highly trained. Williams opened a folder and spread several satellite photographs across the table. These are real-time images from the drone that was providing overwatch for your mission. They show the village, your position, and the ridge where this ghost was supposedly located. Rivera studied the photographs carefully. He could clearly see his own position and the village where his team had been trapped. But when he looked at the distant ridge where Ghost had been shooting from, the images showed nothing but empty terrain. There's nobody there, Hayes pointed out. No person, no equipment, no evidence that anyone was ever in that position. How do you explain that? Rivera felt a chill run down his spine as he stared at the photographs. The images had been taken during the firefight, when Ghost was actively engaging enemy targets. There should have been clear evidence of a sniper position, equipment, and at least some indication of human presence. Instead, the ridge appeared completely uninhabited. I don't understand, Rivera said slowly. I heard the shots. I saw the bullet impacts. Enemy fighters were being eliminated from that position. There has to be some explanation. Williams and Hayes exchanged a meaningful look that Rivera didn't miss. There was something they weren't telling him, some piece of information that they weren't ready to share. The silence in the room became oppressive as Rivera waited for someone to speak. Finally, Williams closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. Rivera, I'm going to share some classified information with you, and it doesn't leave this room. 3 months ago, we started receiving reports of a sniper operating independently in this region, someone with extraordinary skills who appears at critical moments, provides support to coalition forces, and then vanishes without a trace. Hayes picked up the narrative. Intelligence agencies from 3 different countries have been trying to identify this individual. British intelligence calls her the Phantom. Australian forces refer to her as Angel. We've been calling her Ghost based on previous radio intercepts. Rivera's mind raced as he processed this information. You're saying this person has been operating in the area for months, helping coalition forces without authorization? That's exactly what we're saying, Williams confirmed. And today marks the 7th documented intervention by this individual. Each time, coalition forces in desperate situations have been saved by precise long-range shooting from positions that surveillance assets can't detect. Hayes pulled out another folder, this one marked with multiple classification stamps. What makes this even more interesting is the equipment analysis. The bullet impacts and trajectories suggest the use of a rifle system that's more advanced than anything currently in our inventory. We're talking about a weapon capable of accuracy at ranges that should be impossible under field conditions. Rivera felt like he was falling down a rabbit hole of classified operations and mysterious snipers. Who do you think she is? Special operations from another country? Some kind of black project? That's what we've been trying to figure out, Williams replied. The skill level suggests military training at the highest levels. But no country will acknowledge having operations in this area, and the technology being used doesn't match any known weapons systems. Hayes opened the classified folder and showed Rivera a map marked with red pins. These are the locations of all confirmed Ghost interventions over the past 3 months. Notice anything? Rivera studied the map carefully. The red pins formed a rough pattern across the mountainous region, but what struck him most was their positioning relative to major coalition operations. Every intervention was in support of high-priority missions, he observed. Strategic targets, rescue operations, intelligence gathering. Exactly, Williams confirmed. Whoever Ghost is, she has access to classified mission information and the ability to position herself perfectly to provide support. That level of intelligence access suggests someone with very high security clearance. The implications of what Williams was suggesting began to sink in. If Ghost had access to classified mission information, she was either a highly placed intelligence asset or someone with connections to the highest levels of military command. Neither possibility made Rivera feel comfortable about their mysterious savior. There's one more thing, Hayes added, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The rifle impacts that we've been able to analyze show something unusual. The bullets appear to be custom manufactured, with metallurgy that doesn't match any known ammunition type. Someone is supplying Ghost with equipment that's beyond current military specifications. Rivera stared at the classified documents spread across the table, trying to make sense of what he was learning. The sniper who had saved his team wasn't just a mysterious ally operating independently. She was someone with access to advanced technology, classified intelligence, and resources that suggested backing from a very sophisticated organization. "What do you need from me?" Rivera asked finally. Williams closed the classified folder and looked directly at him. "We need you to keep your eyes open. If Ghost makes contact again, if you receive any communication from her, we need to know immediately, and we need you to be prepared for the possibility that your next encounter with her might not be as friendly as the first." As Rivera left the debriefing room, his mind was spinning with questions that had no answers. The woman who had saved his team was apparently a phantom, operating with advanced technology and classified intelligence. Whether she was an ally or a potential threat remained to be seen, but Rivera knew that his next encounter with Ghost would be very different from the first. 3 weeks after the village ambush, Rivera found himself back in the mountains of Afghanistan, this time leading a reconnaissance mission to gather intelligence on enemy supply routes. The team was smaller this time, just 4 operators including Rivera, Chen, and 2 new additions to replace Santos and Rodriguez, who were still recovering from their injuries. The mission had been routine until Chen picked up unusual radio chatter on frequencies that weren't supposed to be active in their area of operations. Someone was coordinating movement of personnel and equipment using military protocols, but the communication patterns didn't match any known coalition operations. Petty Officer Second Class James Park, one of the new team members, was monitoring the enemy frequencies when he detected something that made him grab Rivera's attention immediately. "Sergeant, I'm picking up references to the American sniper team and coordinates that match our current position. Someone knows we're here." Rivera felt the familiar chill of recognition. This was exactly how the ambush 3 weeks ago had started, with enemy forces demonstrating knowledge of their operations that should have been impossible to obtain. He immediately ordered the team to shift to an alternate observation position, while Chen tried to determine the source of the intelligence leak. The new position offered good overwatch of the valley below, where intelligence suggested enemy supply convoys moved under cover of darkness, but Rivera couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The same unnatural silence that had preceded the village ambush seemed to hang over these mountains like a warning. Specialist Tony Valdez, the team's new communications expert, had been monitoring multiple frequencies when he suddenly stiffened. "Sergeant, I'm picking up a transmission on the emergency frequency. Someone's calling for Viper 6. Rivera grabbed the radio handset. The voice that came through the static was familiar, though he hadn't heard it in 3 weeks. "Viper 6, this is Ghost. You have enemy forces moving to surround your position. Recommend immediate displacement to grid 34.3212 north, 692156 east. The coordinates Ghost provided were for a ridge position about 2 miles from their current location. It would take at least an hour to reach in the darkness, and moving that distance would expose them to observation by any enemy forces in the area." But Rivera had learned to trust Ghost's intelligence even if he didn't understand how she obtained it. "Ghost, this is Viper 6, Rivera responded. "How do you know our position? And how do you know about enemy movement in this area?" There was a long pause before Ghost replied. "Viper 6, that information is classified above your clearance level. Trust me when I say that you need to move now. You have 15 minutes before enemy forces reach your current position." Rivera made the decision to trust Ghost's warning, despite the questions it raised about her knowledge of classified operations. He ordered his team to pack their equipment immediately and prepare for rapid movement to the coordinates Ghost had provided. As they moved through the rocky terrain in near total darkness, Rivera couldn't help but wonder how Ghost always seemed to be in the right place at the right time. The level of intelligence she possessed suggested access to satellite imagery, intercepted communications, and mission planning documents that should have been restricted to the highest levels of military command. Park, who was providing rear security as they moved, suddenly held up his hand and pointed back toward their previous position. In the distance, barely visible in the moonlight, dark figures were moving across the ridge where they had been observing the valley. Ghost's warning had been accurate, and her timing had been perfect. The team reached the coordinates Ghost had provided just as the first hints of dawn began to appear over the mountains. The position offered excellent concealment and clear sight lines over multiple approach routes. More importantly, it provided overlapping fields of fire that would allow a small team to defend against a much larger force. Rivera was setting up his rifle when Chen called out softly from his radio position. "Marcus, I'm picking up a transmission. Someone's asking for situation reports from the teams that were supposed to surround us. They're reporting that our previous position is empty. The implications were clear. Enemy forces had indeed moved to surround their original observation post, just as Ghost had warned. Without her intervention, Rivera's team would have been trapped in an indefensible position with no advance warning of the approaching threat. Ghost, this is Viper 6, Rivera transmitted on the emergency frequency. We're in position at the coordinates you provided. Request your status and intentions. Ghost's voice came back immediately as if she had been waiting for his transmission. Viper 6, I'm in overwatch position with clear sight lines to your location and the surrounding area. Be advised that enemy forces are regrouping and will likely attempt to locate your new position within the next 2 hours. Rivera studied the terrain around their position, looking for the ridge or elevated position where Ghost might be located. The coordinates she had given them were in a valley surrounded by multiple peaks and ridgelines, any of which could provide a suitable sniper position. But despite careful observation through his scope, he could see no sign of another person in the area. Valdez had been monitoring enemy communications when he suddenly became very animated. Sergeant, enemy forces are reporting sniper fire from an unknown position. They're taking casualties and requesting reinforcement. Rivera grabbed his binoculars and scanned the valley below. Through the morning haze, he could see enemy fighters taking cover behind rocks and buildings, clearly under fire from a distant position, but he could neither see the source of the incoming fire nor hear the sound of the shots, suggesting that Ghost was engaging from extreme range. Ghost, this is Viper 6, Rivera called on the radio. Confirm you are engaging enemy forces in the valley below our position. Affirmative, Viper 6. Eliminating enemy forces that were moving to flank your position. Count 8 targets down. 4 remaining in covered positions. Rivera watched through his binoculars as Ghost's prediction proved accurate. The remaining enemy fighters were indeed taking cover in positions that would have allowed them to approach Rivera's team from their blind spot. Once again, Ghost's intervention was preventing an ambush that could have been catastrophic. But as Rivera observed the tactical situation developing below, he began to notice something that made him deeply uncomfortable. Ghost's knowledge of enemy movements and positions was too accurate, too detailed. She wasn't just providing Overwatch support. She was demonstrating intelligence capabilities that suggested access to real-time surveillance assets and communication intercepts. The realization hit Rivera like a physical blow. Ghost wasn't just a mysterious allied sniper. She was someone with access to the same intelligence resources that had been used to compromise his previous mission. Whether she was friend or foe, Ghost represented a level of security risk that could endanger every coalition operation in the region. Rivera's suspicions about Ghost crystallized into a plan that went against every protocol he had been taught about operational security. Instead of reporting his concerns immediately to command, he decided to force a direct confrontation with the mysterious sniper. If Ghost was compromising coalition operations, he needed proof before making accusations that could destroy careers and compromise ongoing missions. Ghost, this is Viper 6, Rivera transmitted on the emergency frequency. Request immediate face-to-face meeting to coordinate tactical situation. Provide coordinates for rendezvous. There was a long pause before Ghost responded, and Rivera could hear hesitation in her voice for the first time. Viper 6, face-to-face meetings are not advisable given current security situation. I can provide Overwatch and tactical support from my current position. Rivera pressed the issue. Ghost, I need confirmation of your identity and authorization for operations in this area. My commanding officer has specific questions about your activities that require direct contact. Another pause, longer this time. When Ghost finally responded, her voice had changed subtly, becoming more formal and military in tone. Viper 6, meet me at grid coordinates 343156 north, 69.203 east in 30 minutes. Come alone and bring proof of your identity and security clearance. The coordinates Ghost provided were for a small plateau about halfway between Rivera's position and the ridge where he estimated she was located. It was an exposed position that offered little cover, suggesting that Ghost was confident in her ability to control the tactical situation. Rivera told his team that he was conducting a short-range reconnaissance patrol and would be back within 2 hours. Chen looked skeptical about Rivera going out alone, but military discipline prevented him from questioning his sergeant's orders directly. The climb to the rendezvous point took Rivera 25 minutes through rocky terrain that would have been treacherous in darkness. As he approached the plateau, Rivera moved with extreme caution, knowing that he was potentially walking into a confrontation with someone whose capabilities he didn't fully understand. The plateau was empty when Rivera arrived, offering only a few large boulders for cover. He positioned himself behind the largest rock formation and waited, his rifle ready but not aimed in any specific direction. The morning sun was climbing higher, eliminating many of the shadows that could have concealed a hidden shooter. Rivera had been waiting for nearly 10 minutes when a voice spoke from directly behind him. "You can turn around now, Sergeant Rivera. Keep your hands visible and move slowly." Rivera spun around, shocked that someone had been able to approach his position without making any sound on the rocky ground. What he saw surprised him even more than the stealthy approach. Ghost was a woman in her early 30s with short brown hair and intense green eyes. She wore no visible rank insignia, but her equipment and bearing screamed special operations. "Who are you?" Rivera asked, keeping his hands visible as instructed. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, British Special Air Service," she replied, showing him military identification that looked authentic. "I've been operating under classified authorization from Joint Intelligence Command for the past 4 months." Rivera studied the identification carefully, but he knew that documents could be forged by anyone with sufficient resources. "Why isn't your operation coordinated with local coalition forces? And how do you have access to our mission planning?" Mitchell holstered her sidearm and seemed to relax slightly. "Because my mission involves identifying and eliminating a security leak that's been compromising coalition operations for months. Someone with high-level access has been selling mission information to enemy forces. Your team's ambush 3 weeks ago was the latest in a series of operations that were compromised by inside intelligence." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place for Rivera. "You've been using yourself as bait, positioning yourself to provide backup when compromised missions go wrong." "Exactly," Mitchell confirmed. "Every time a mission gets compromised, I'm in position to provide support and gather intelligence about how the information was obtained. Your team's survival 3 weeks ago wasn't just good luck. It was part of a larger operation to identify the source of the security breaches." Rivera felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that Ghost was actually an allied operator, and anger that his team had been used as unwitting bait in a counterintelligence operation. "How many teams have been put at risk for your operation?" Mitchell's expression grew serious. 7 operations over 4 months. Yours was the first one where we didn't lose anyone, thanks to the tactical support I was able to provide. The intelligence we've gathered has allowed us to narrow down the source of the leaks to 3 individuals with access to mission planning. "Who are the suspects?" Rivera asked. "I can't share that information," Mitchell replied, "but I can tell you that one of them is in your chain of command, which is why this operation has been conducted without coordination through normal channels." Rivera felt another chill as he realized the implications. Someone he worked with, someone he trusted, had been responsible for the ambush that nearly killed his entire team. The betrayal was personal in a way that made him want to demand immediate action. "What happens now?" Rivera asked. Mitchell checked her watch and looked around the plateau as if expecting company. "Now we spring the trap. Your mission today was deliberately leaked to all 3 suspects with slightly different details. Depending on which version of the intelligence the enemy forces are acting on, we'll know who the traitor is." Rivera suddenly understood why Mitchell had asked him to come alone to this exposed position. "We're bait again, aren't we?" "I'm afraid so," Mitchell admitted. "But this time you know what's happening, and I've got backup plans in place. Within the next hour, enemy forces will move to intercept your team based on the leaked intelligence. Their approach route and tactics will tell us exactly who provided the information." As if summoned by Mitchell's words, Rivera's radio crackled with Chen's voice. "Viper 6, we have movement in the valley. Multiple enemy forces approaching from the northeast, exactly as briefed in yesterday's intelligence update." Mitchell smiled grimly. "That's the version we leaked to Major Hayes. Looks like we have our answer." Rivera felt sick as he realized that the intelligence officer who had questioned him about Ghost's identity was the same person who had been betraying coalition operations for months. "How do we prove it?" "We already have," Mitchell said, pulling out a secure satellite phone. "Intelligence analysts have been monitoring communications intercepts for the past hour." Major Hayes made contact with enemy forces 45 minutes ago, using a communication method that matches previous security breaches. Rivera watched as Mitchell made a brief phone call, presumably to coordinate the arrest of the traitorous intelligence officer. The operation that had started with a desperate distress call in a village ambush was finally coming to an end. The mysterious sniper who had saved his team had turned out to be conducting one of the most sophisticated counterintelligence operations he had ever heard of. "Will I see you again?" Rivera asked as Mitchell prepared to leave the plateau. She smiled for the first time since he had met her. "Probably not. My work here is done, and I'll be moving on to other operations. But thank you for trusting me enough to come to this meeting. Without your team's cooperation, we never would have been able to identify the security leak." As Mitchell disappeared into the rocky terrain with the same stealth she had demonstrated in approaching the plateau, Rivera realized that he would probably never know the full extent of the operation that had saved his team's lives. The mysterious ghost had turned out to be a real person with a real mission. But the legend of the Phantom Sniper would continue to grow among coalition forces operating in the mountains of Afghanistan. Rivera made his way back to his team, knowing that the war would continue, but that one small part of it had been made safer by the courage and skill of a British captain who had been willing to risk everything to protect the lives of Allied soldiers she had never met.